Hey, I'm Di McQueen, licensed clinical social worker, family and addiction expert. I'm here with Dr. Brian Jackson, my longtime cohort who specializes in the field of addiction. Welcome to Healing Families Shattered by Addiction.
Di and I have worked with addicts, alcoholics, and their families for over 30 years combined. Our podcast and coaching programs focus on families who have a loved one suffering from addiction. Our experience has been that this disease affects families as much, if not more, than the addict or alcoholic.
Is your world spinning out of control? Are you codependent? Are you experiencing worry, loss of sleep, and difficulty concentrating? If so, you're in the right place. Brian and I have both personally lived it, learned it, and now we're going to teach you tools and techniques on how to get your life back that you thought was shattered by addiction. When addiction feels overwhelming, the right support can change everything. Recovery Keys, located in Ponte Vedra Beach, offers accredited residential and outpatient treatment for substance use and co-occurring mental health conditions. Unlock the keys to your recovery today. Visit recoverykeys.org or call 904-551-1394.
Okay, let's dive in.
Hey everybody, this is Di McQueen, and I'm here today to talk to you about detachment. Our podcast is Healing Families Shattered by Addiction, and I thought today we could talk a little bit about what detachment looks like, how it applies in the addictive world, how it applies to the family of the addicted person, whether it's a substance use disorder or alcohol use disorder, or even other disorders, and addictions like gambling, sex, etc. So detachment, especially in families affected by addiction, is often mostly misunderstood. It's not coldness, abandonment, or giving up on someone. It's rather a shift in trying to control another person's behaviors, etc., to taking responsibility for our own well-being. This was a really hard concept for me, to be truthful, probably one of the hardest ones. Kind of make a joke that, years and years ago, I was seeing a counselor about this when I first, was trying to work on my own, being the family member of an addict who was very, very heavily in their disease at the time. And I remember my counselor going, here's a flyer on detachment, and I want you reading it 75 times a day, Di. And I was like, what? Yeah. He'd say, yeah, you kind of take 4 steps and you forget. And so I would read this thing over and over again. It was a very hard concept for me to understand and comprehend because it was so unnatural to me. So what actually is detachment? Separating your emotional stability from another person's choices. So in other words, when they're making choices to do these things, it would affect us in a really, like, you'd be all jacked up, anxious, and or sick to your stomach or whatever the case may be. And learning how to detach those things and understanding that because someone makes a choice, I don't have to fall completely apart. And that was really like a new mind blower for me. And I really had a hard time trying to figure that all out. Letting go of the illusion, and I like the word illusion because we do think that somewhere we have some kind of control that we're going to fix or rescue this addicted person. It's not true. It's not up to us, although, we can do things that will affect, but not necessarily stop, the behaviors. Staying connected with care, but not entangled in the chaos. So one of the things that is actually pretty prevalent in most addicted families is that there's always chaos going on. If there's an addict in their cups, they're definitely going to be, there's going to be like a tornado following them. So it is also making sure that you root yourself in with other people that understand, so they can help you, especially when you're like in it, there's a difference between those folks who have had people that are using and then people that are in remission or in recovery, etc. And it does change the dynamics. Although you can learn, as did I, to be okay whether the addict was using or not. But that's not an overnight sensation. It takes some time. It takes some practice. It definitely takes support. And it definitely takes an understanding of. These are new concepts. For most of us, mind blowing. It's like it made absolutely zero sense to me in the beginning, and every bit of sense. It keeps me alive today, and I know I have to do it. Detachment is not, and this is really important, it is not that you're abandoning or that you don't love. It's not indifference. Like, in other words, I don't give a crap what happens. I don't care. Yes, you do care, and it's okay to care, but it is not having that indifference. You are very understanding of what is going on, and yet I can still love this person and detach from the behavior. It's not punishment, nor is it passive aggressive, the silent treatment, etc. It's not those things, because I can again still love and detach from someone else's behavior and still care about them deeply and not be trying to punish them and do things that are, hurtful to them. It's also not cutting someone else off unless it means, your safety. There are times when you must, and it's important that you understand where and when, and that's talking to a professional or other support groups like an Al-Anon or a Nar-Anon that will help you understand, where you're at and how you need to be safe. An important distinction is detachment. It does not equal love with boundaries, right? Or excuse me, it does equal love with boundaries. That's what I meant. Detachment is love with boundaries, right? Not rejection. Super important to understand that. Most families struggle with detachment, because we're in chronic crisis mode. By the time we get to the understanding that we are somewhere way down the line and we are so emotionally distraught and not able to think or function, we stay up at nights worrying, we're texting, we're chasing, we're, tracking them on our phones, we're following them, you're going into bars looking for them, etc. We've gone way past what detachment looks like. And so at that point, we are in that chronic, it's always chaotic. There's always something going on. It's hard to, struggle with detachment with family situations because we get into a role, right? We now have set up a dynamic that there is, that you are this and I am that, right? If you are the enabler or the rescuer or the fixer, they know. And now it's now become a game almost, right? But we also don't know how to pull ourselves out of that. There's a tremendous amount of fear, so it's hard to detach when you're in fear mode. If I don't help, something terrible will happen. Fact is, something terrible might happen, but helping is really not helping, right? When you learn the difference between what is help and what is enabling, you start to understand that actually what I've been doing is maybe perpetuating what naturally needs to happen. And I'm maybe postponing the inevitable. By now it gets worse and worse and worse. So there's so much around the fear, and I always go, the opposite of fear is faith. And that doesn't necessarily mean religious faith, right? It means faith in that I'm not it and I cannot have all the answers. Trying to have all the answers is what gets us into this trouble. And unfortunately, we're the ones suffering most of the time. Well, the other person is just out doing what they do. That doesn't mean they don't get into trouble and things like that. But I can tell you, as both sides of this aisle, being the family member was far greater distress for me by far than what was going on when I was using. The guilt, I should be able to save them, right? So we feel so guilty that, like, why can't I? What's wrong with me? Why won't they listen to me? Or they know how to work you in such a way that there's some guilt involved that way. And our identities become tied in with this addicted person and the personal outcome. So it's very hard to detach when you have so much invested in this. And of course, what do people think, right? In other words, somehow I'm the reason why this is happening. I should have done better. I should have known more. I shoulda. And so, we talk a lot about detachment and learning how to distinguish yourself from the shoulds. There is no shoulds. And really, truly, how do we get to play, the masterful one, the wizard, the god, the whatever. And unfortunately, we just don't have that kind of power. But we think we do. We certainly do as family members. And it gets all tied up in, I have to make this outcome successful. Unfortunately, I wish I could say that in every instance that would work out that way, but it does not. And people do die with this disease. And it's very sad and it's very heartbreaking, but it's not your fault. And it never will be your fault. The person that is using and abusing understands that they are making choices and that there's options and opportunities for something different. And, they're great at making someone believe that they're the reason, but that's not true. And anybody that's been in any kind of recovery understands that they don't get to blame somebody else. The psychology behind detachment is, it overlaps strongly with codependency. So it's very difficult because most of the time when addiction is working, and the role playing of an addicted family is a very codependent, enmeshed family. And so it's very hard to understand where they stop and I begin. It's also reinforced by that, intermittent reward system. Things get better sometimes. And so I start really believing that I am that powerful, or I go back into the role and I forget about how this all plays out. I can be strong for a little while. We get a reprieve and you build a little strength, and then it all begins again. Um, the emotional exhaustion, which leads to burnout, resentment, anxiety, all those emotions that are negative, and yet we can't stop, right? It's hard to detach because we're so in it as a family member, trying to fix, rescue, control, make it better, stop them. We are in all of it. And without knowing it, many family members play right into the cycle of addiction and they participate in it the entire time because they don't understand it enough and they don't know how to jump off the merry-go-round. So it's very difficult when you're just learning. At first, these are like a foreign language that you've never understood. And it's much harder the longer you're in it because we understand the language that we know. So, what does detachment look like when it's in practice and you're doing it, right? It's not covering up for the person, lying, or making up excuses anymore, which feels very awkward. At least it did for me. I mean, I didn't even realize it, but I was lying about everything, not intentionally. But someone would say, "Hey, how is he?" And I'd say, "Oh, he's fine. He's just sick today." Things like that. Like, I didn't need to say that, but I'd always come up with something because I was embarrassed. I didn't want people to know what was going on. I had to look like I had it all together. And in fact, I was a mess, right? I was a mess. My life was a mess. He was a mess. Everybody was a mess. And it's been many in between, right? So detachment looks like in practice is allowing the natural consequence, however that's going to be, whether it's a legal consequence, a financial consequence, relational consequence, end up divorced, separated, if they need to get a DUI, or worse, if an accident were to occur or things like that, which of course we don't want to see happen, but it may be necessary for this person to finally wake up, and hopefully without hurting another person. It's refusing to engage in an argument with the person who's intoxicated or, is high as a kite. We know that those circular conversations go nowhere. You feel like you're crazy. You don't know what's going on. They're gaslighting you. They're lying to you, and you're all twisted up inside. And yet you continue to try to explain, deny, go through whatever it is. And it's just not doable. So you walk away, you detach yourself from the situation or the argument. And that literally means, stepping away. I'm sorry, I'm not going to speak to you right now. I'm going to excuse myself. And you do that. That's healthy detachment. Refusing, setting limits, excuse me. I won't give you money. I will give you something to eat, but I'm not going to give you money. That's setting a limit, a boundary. You can't stay here if you're using. That's another kind of limit or boundary. Again, I can feed you, but I'm not going to do that. I will give you a new pair of pants, but I'm not going to go ahead and give you the $35 that you want. I'm not going to do that anymore. And prioritizing you and your mental health and your own stability is, detachment in practice. Like, I'm starting to feel like I'm getting a little crazy, unstable, whatever. So I'm going to take care of me versus worry about you. So it's very interesting when you start to figure this stuff out. You start to realize, oh my gosh, I've been giving away my own mental sanity for this person for so long. And I didn't even realize it. I didn't realize I was all jacked up. I didn't realize that I couldn't sleep at night because of this situation. I pace all night long. I'm having nightmares. I can't sleep. I've got to take care of that. That's detaching. That doesn't mean I don't care about the person. It means I'm going to take care of my own mental health and stability first. The emotional reality of detachment is very uncomfortable at first because it feels like you're doing something horribly wrong. Like this poor person is out there, suffering, and I am doing nothing. That's not true. In most cases, the person is well aware of exactly what they're doing, and you suffering has no bearing on that person whatsoever, doesn't stop them for a moment from doing what they're doing. As a matter of fact, they might even be blaming you for that. If I detach, if I don't do that, I might go into, an anxiety attack, panic attack, whatever. The more I start to detach, I stop doing a lot of those things. It also requires not knowing what might happen, right? I don't know the outcome and I don't need to know the outcome. It's very, very hard. But the more I let go of the control of it, and I call it the reins, right? And just say, it's going to happen, it's going to happen. I might get a little panicky. I might even have to go into some grief because it is very sad. And I might lose this person. I might literally lose this person. But when I realize that it's not my fault nor my responsibility, it opens up a whole new vein. It's probably one of the most important tools I ever got in learning how to understand what it's important as far as being able to be there for a loved one, in their addiction. And detachment is very, very important. It brings on clarity. And in time, it will help you with great relief. Your whole being starts to calm down. You can get more clear and you can, bring yourself back to a sane and stable, grounded place if using detachment. It is one of many tools, but it is a big one. I would say it's in that top 5 for sure. Common misperceptions of things that happen with, like, if and when you're first starting to understand detachment, things like, if I detach, they'll spiral further. And the truth is, oftentimes the opposite happens, right? There's consequences for whatever, and it drives a change. So yeah, they might spiral. That might be very true, but it's not because of you. And we actually think that it is. We give ourselves way more authority than we ever should or is necessary. It's really interesting as you start to realize that, the more I back up, many, many more times than not, the person gets weller, right? Because they end up having to sit in their own skin and realizing they no longer have someone to blame, and it doesn't work. Another misconception is that I'm being selfish. If I do this, I'm a really bad person and I'm not, I'm being extremely selfish. Those are old tapes. Those are misconceptions. It's actually not true. To be honest with you, most of the time it's necessary for our long term health. Anybody that's experienced being and living in the chaos of addiction while people are using and abusing without figuring out a way to detach, people die on this side of the street from the stress, heart attack, stroke, literally things like cancer, etc. Your mental health, goes completely sideways. There's stomach ulcers, there's all kinds of things, colitis, all those kind of internal autoimmune, all of that stuff can be related to these types of things. So our health is very important. And when I learned to detach, interestingly enough, my health got better, as do many. It's really interesting. They're going to feel like we abandon them. And that is also not true, right? As long as I'm putting a boundary to something, I can coexist with this person with tremendous compassion, recognizing that my internal boundaries that I have to give an external boundary to, once I know what mine are, I can then propose my own boundary, right? My line in the sand for someone and how they're going to behave in my presence. And I have the right to do that because it affects my person. I have to know me well enough first before I can present them. But once I do, um, that's important. So learning that is so important. I'm not responsible for how another person feels. If they want to throw that one at you, that may be what they're saying, but it's not actually true. And another misconception is somehow I'm responsible for this person's recovery. Fact, you're not. Very important to understand that. So it's super important when you're recognizing what's important and what is healthy and supportive versus unhealthy support, right? So unhealthy support is doing things like giving money to people and you're funding their addiction. That's not healthy, right? Fixing legal or social consequences that happen. And, sometimes you can weigh those out, but oftentimes, if this is the second, third, fourth time around, it's better let them suffer their own consequences because they need to kind of figure that out. So that's unhealthy support. Constantly monitoring and controlling and being that person who is like hovering and helicoptering over this person is not healthy. It's not supportive. It actually might encourage them to go out and use more because they just can't stand it anymore. Healthy support, on the other hand, looks like encouraging treatment and recovery without mandating it, right? Just letting the person having to suffer some of these things, they may finally come to you and say, I need help. I don't know how to do this. And in most cases, we don't either. It's better if they learn how to do this on their own because, again, we don't want anything that's going to bring it back to blaming, you for whatever's going right or whatever's going wrong. It is the person's responsibility, and that's detachment. Um, being emotionally there and available without enabling, right? Which you can do. You can do a lot of things without doing it for the person. And helping them support, their own accountability if they want to do that. Like, for instance, maybe someone says to you, listen, when I get paid, I'm going to have to, see if I can have someone that would be willing to monitor paying my bills. And you say, well, for 6 months while you're in recovery and starting your journey, I would be willing to do that. That's an accountability partner. I'm going to give you my check. You're going to pay my bills. So I can't have money right now. And I think that's really important that you understand. And you also have to know you well enough to go, is that going to be good for me or is that too much pressure for me? And there's many other things. Maybe they need a ride to the treatment center every day and you're willing to do that. And um, at 6 o'clock I need to be with somebody for an hour because that's sort of a time frame that I used to do something, and you say I'm willing to do that for you, and that's accountability for the other person. That's supportive. I will go for a walk together during that time, or we'll have dinner together or whatever. That's helping someone have accountability without telling them how they have to do it. Sometimes the turning point for family members comes from something like you finally have that epiphany where you go, nothing I do makes them stop or makes them start, right? So I'm starting to understand that there is a detachment that's happening because I get that I'm not in control of those things. I am not the reason why they use or don't use. That's the important part to remember, and that is detachment. Shifting from crisis management to self-preservation. So there's always crisis going on. I'm always running to rescue, enable, do whatever I'm doing, Johnny on it. And I'm like, no, when I decide that I'm going to take care of myself first, and if this fits in what is important and good for me, then I might be willing to do it. And then again, I might not. Or maybe I'm willing to do a portion of that. And that's about it. I can remember one time when my ex-brother-in-law used to say to me, like, I need this money. I need, $10,000 or $1,000. And I would say, well, I'm willing to give you $100 because I knew I was never going to get it back. And, or I'm willing to pay that bill directly for you. And that was, as much as I could do. And I can remember one time he got really mad and was like, that's not going to help me. And I said, well, then zero's good. That's what we'll do. That's okay by me. Letting go of the outcomes and focusing on progress rather than where it's going to end up. Each day when they're doing something that is, workable and you have that reprieve, one of those great lessons of learning how to stay in the present. So, really important where you start to recognize what detachment, what does enabling, what does that stuff look like so that you can kind of practice, right? So, some tools for detachment: go to a meeting, right? A counselor, a meeting, something that can help you understand what those things look like and hearing it from people who have done it before you, an Al-Anon meeting, a Nar-Anon meeting, any of the other, family supports that happen, smart recovery, CODA, whatever it is that may work for you. Seeing a counselor or a coach, that would be very helpful, especially when they can talk to you about what does boundary setting look like and how trauma has related to all of this in your world. Because a lot of times with all this stuff that's been going on, I mean, it is traumatic and it has a lasting effect. So we need to make sure that we understand all of those things and figure out where your lines. I only know my own internal boundaries, what works for me. And then I have to learn how to externally tell you that that's not going to be doable for me. And that takes some help, at times, especially because when I first started this stuff, I had no idea what a boundary looked like. Our lines were so enmeshed and so crossed over that there was no way I could have distinguished what was healthy or not healthy or supportive or not supportive. So it takes a little bit of work and it's okay. And in the beginning, having people that understand that and can support you and acknowledge and, give you accolades about the progress that's being made without judgment is so helpful. Another great tool for detachment is journaling, to separate your emotions from their emotions. Just doing a brain dump, journaling about it. A brain dump is something where I just write, and then I rip up the paper without ever rereading it and just letting it go and throw it away. Journaling, on the other hand, is actually journaling from day to day to day. And, I may or may not choose to reread it and see what's going on there. Creating your own bottom lines. These are the things that I will and won't tolerate. I need to know me. I need to understand what is viable for me and what I am willing to do and not do. And everybody's got different places that they're willing to go with this. Some people may say, you know what, again, I will pay for their recovery if I see them doing X, Y, and Z. Other family members go like, no way, not paying for this. I've already done that before. I'm not doing that again. I will help them and support them, but I'm not paying their bills anymore. I will bring them food, but I'm not paying their bills anymore, etc., etc. There's lots of examples of that. And only you know where you are willing to go and not willing to go. And that's what you have to decide. And that usually takes a little bit of work and some help and processing it with somebody else, especially a good counselor or coach, or one of your group supports. So when you kind of review a little bit, detachment, in my opinion, is one of the hardest and most powerful shifts a family can make. So, I mean, making, the understanding that it's probably one of the most powerful shifts that you can make is just in general going to make you understand that that's going to be hard, especially when we've been doing a dynamic, you know, in a dance that we've been doing for a long time. It's going to feel awkward. It's going to feel like I'm being, a horrible person. But in truth, you are not. It often feels like you're stepping back, right? Because this is new and this is so uncomfortable. But in reality, it's stepping out of the addiction and back into your own life. It's so important that you understand that you need to take control of you. You can't control anything or anybody else but you. And you can do all these things to detach from and be supportive of. But first and foremost, you must take care of yourself. So I'm going to encourage you to look up more and, work on things that allow you to detach from the disease and allow yourself to be present in your own life. So thanks for letting me spend some time with you today. This is Di from Healing Families Shattered by Addiction. We have a wonderful website, which is family and addiction experts.com. I'm losing it. And there is some free resources on there. Feel free to download those and get some information. You are welcome to see if you want to do, if you need to ask us a question, send us an email. We'd love to hear from you. We do free consultations to see if there's something that we can do to be helpful or guide you in a direction that you may need to go. Thanks so much for letting me share some time with you today, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much for joining our podcast, Healing Families Shattered by Addiction. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with more important tools, techniques, and ways for you to focus on you instead of the alcoholic or addict in your world.
Until then, please go to our website, familyandaddictionexperts.com. That's familyandaddictionexperts.com. You'll also see links to our Facebook and Instagram pages. Please also, if you have any emails that you would like to send us, that's info@familyandaddictionexperts.com. That's info@familyandaddictionexperts.com. With any thoughts, feelings, questions that you may have for us, we would love to hear from you, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.
Unlock the keys to your recovery today. Visit recoverykeys.org or call 904-551-1394.